when you think about it, we all do speak in certain rhythms. No one really kind of speaks really fast for a little bit and then starts to go like this,
That's
right?
right.
You could probably map out in 10 minutes of someone talking. There's a rhythm in there.
Yeah.
And when you put a
Yeah.
consistent beat underneath it, that algorithm is going to line up and it's
Yeah.
going to turn it into almost a spoken word thing. That's one of the comments we get a lot from a lot of people. They're like, this feels like you made my podcast guy into a hip hop artist or a beat poet because he's not rhyming, but he's talking in rhythm. How did you do
Yeah.
that? And like, we didn't do it. It just kind of happens.
Funny how.
Come here, though. Yeah, he's crazy, see? Who are you?
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Are you ready?
Ladies and gents, thanks for tuning in. So today's guest, very fascinating cat. Can't wait to talk to him. Nathan, what's up, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Tony, thanks for having me, man. This is fantastic.
Yeah, for sure, man. And of course, we're doing this virtually, like most of my episodes. But where are you based out of again?
So I am most of the time based in Chicago, but
Nice.
when it gets a little cold, I kind of run south for a
Nice.
while.
Nice.
Only started doing that this year, though. Like, I'm Canadian, right? So I don't mind the cold.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
after like 2.5 months of it, you're kind of like, all right, I'm done with you.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, and I got a couple of buddies that actually are from Canada, and obviously they moved down here to the States. Or I think they have to go back up. What's the rule? They have to go back up like a couple times a year?
I actually don't know the rule. Canada
Yeah.
has so many rules that, like,
I know. It's a different cold. It's not a Chicago cold. It's not a North Cali cold. It is like brutal. You're inside. You're not doing shit. It's like miserable. So
It is.
I couldn't imagine living in that type of country. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there's really no, aside from a major city, I mean, most of that country is just open land and just
Yeah.
cold.
Yep.
You
You're,
know.
like
Yeah.
Toronto basically has a mall underneath it that you can like sneak down into and just get around the city through it. A lot of tourists don't know about it because it's kind of daunting. It's like the New York subway. The first time you go there, you're like, I'm not getting on this shit.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. It is terrifying. I remember the first time that I went to the subway in New York. It's a different world because
Yeah.
you can't imagine something going that deep below ground. And little do you know, like that's exactly what it is. It's just a sewer. It's a sewer that has a train. It's disgusting.
Yeah, the seed of moving south, like for winter, was planted in my brain about 5 or 6 years ago. I was shooting a commercial. We're out in LA and we're on the water and we're shooting this guy and we're taking a break and the cameraman's sitting beside me and he kind of looks over at me and goes, "So where are you from, man?" And I'm like, "Canada." He's like, "Huh, it's cold up there." I'm like, "Yeah. But you do different things, right? Like,
Yeah.
during the winter, you create new habits and you try different things." And he just looked at me
Yeah.
and goes, "I don't know, man. Spending half your life in the cold seems stupid."
Dude.
And it just sat with me.
Yeah, I bet. Well, and people say that to me when I'm in Florida. That's where I'm at. So like people are like, "Bro, it's so hot," and I'm like, "Well, I mean, yeah." And like, "Well, what do you do like during the summer? Do you just stay inside?" I'm like, "Nah, man, we go to the beach. It's just hot. You just sweat more. It's not, it's not that big of a deal." I was like, "Oh, I need the seasons. I need 4 seasons." I'm like, "Fuck that." I'm totally okay with only. I think we froze our ass off just these last couple weeks, and it got down to like 40 at night.
Yeah.
And but now it's like 72 degrees. There's a brisk chill in the air. It's windy. It's gorgeous. Palm trees are flapping. Blue skies. I mean, you gotta dodge some hurricanes between like August and October. But aside from that, it's not bad. Yeah.
We're right near NASA. So I think what everyone kind of said is, look, move around NASA because they've kind of figured it out. They have a whole bunch of expensive shit that they can't afford to like be destroyed. So they found the pocket.
That's so true. That's hilarious. Yeah. Well, right on, man. Well, listen, I'm going to leave all your links, your sites, all that stuff down below. But if you can, give us a quick Cliff Notes for people just listening and watching about, what you do, Nathan, and all that jazz.
Yeah, man, I do a couple different things. So right now, I'm the executive creative director at Highdive Advertising. It's an ad agency in Chicago. I run basically Jeep's advertising for North America. So we make all their commercials. We did some on the Super Bowl last year. We didn't have one in this year. The auto worker strike kind of threw things off a little bit. It's
Sure.
hard to do. Yeah, you can't do an auto worker strike where you're arguing about money, and then
Right.
after you lose, just go and buy a Super Bowl spot because they'll be like, "You motherfuckers."
Yeah. It's not good practice. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
it's bad form. So that's my day job, and then I have a side project. My wife and I created an app called Podbeat, which as a podcaster, it's in this world. It lets podcast listeners add a beat to any podcast. So
Yeah.
it's great for workouts, right? So people love podcasts for the content, man. Like what you guys do, it's hours, it feeds us, and episodes dropping every week. People are religious to their podcasts.
Yeah.
But
That's
what
right.
we found out was a lot of people don't use them for workouts. And I wasn't doing it myself. So we kind of created this thing, and we had a pretty interesting story how we did create it. I don't know if you want to go into that now or
Yeah. I'd love to know more. Yeah. How'd
well,
you guys
what
get
it is-
started?
yeah, well, my wife had cataracts at a really early age, like 36. She got cataracts. Everyone was just like, wow, this is the youngest cataracts. So she went in for surgery, and she had a reaction to the steroids, and she basically couldn't see for 6 months. So she still, we're both fit people. We both exercise a lot. She still wanted to work out. So she would get on the treadmill because that was the safest option. And she would listen to podcasts, just loves podcasts. That kept her going. But eventually she was just like, I need something more for this. So I would have something like this, and I would play beats beside her while she listened to her podcast because there was just no way to do this.
Yeah.
And one day after doing it, she was just like, we should make an app for this. Her background's tech. And so we kind of laid it out, planned it all out. And then boom, that became, as soon as she got her site back, that was our main goal. So
Wow, dude. That's insane. What a great story. And how's she doing now? Everything's good health-wise?
she's
And
good now. Yeah, she's good. Yeah, it
good,
was
man.
very scary, man, for a bit.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Oh, especially at such a young age. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I must say, as someone who uses the app, it's to me, because again, the reason I started my podcast was because, like you, I am a fan of podcasts. And I've been listening to podcasts before they were even called podcasts. When I was 18 years old and in college, I'd be listening to radio shows now that have pretty much become podcasts. But back then we never knew, and a lot of people don't know the history of a podcast. I don't know if you're aware of it, but
No, I don't.
so the reason it's called a podcast is because the word broadcasting, right? Self-explanatory. It's a broadcast, but when Apple came out with the iPod, they wanted a way to create, instead of having AM, FM on their pod, how can I listen to these shows, these broadcasts on my iPod or iTunes as it was later known? And then
Interesting.
iPod, and broadcast became podcast. And I think the very first podcaster, I want to say maybe was Adam Curry, if I remember correctly. He's like the pod father is what they call him. And then, guys like Adam Carolla started his show, and then Joe Rogan. These are guys that kind of help lead the way. And, even Tom Green had a play in this as well. So it's fascinating, the history of podcasts, because it's like a lot of things. It's just part of our life now.
Yeah.
It's one
drop
of those
a
things.
Tom Green reference because I'm Canadian?
Yeah,
that
please.
That's what you just did?
Yeah. Only
I
for
haven't
that
heard
reason.
Tom Green's name in a while, man.
Yeah. Well, the Jim Carrey reference is coming later in the podcast.
Excellent.
I'll slowly start dropping in Ryan Reynolds and other well-known Canadians just to keep you guys relevant,
I like the ones that haven't lost their minds.
So only Ryan Reynolds, I think, is left.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So I'm just a fan of podcasts, and I love consuming them. And eventually I listened to so many podcasts. I think the guy that probably put it over the edge for me was maybe Gary Vee and Joe Rogan. In fact, I think they might have been on a podcast together. And this is maybe going back, 8 years ago. And Gary Vee was on Joe Rogan's podcast. And like a lot of Gary Vee's content, he talks about, fucking do it now, bro. Like, you need to fucking put out the content today. Okay. And little intense sometimes. I do enjoy his content, but then one thing that really resonated with him is like, if you listen to podcasts and you have something to say, try starting a blog, start a podcast, start something to kind of like journal. And that's what I did. I started a blog, and I'm not a fan of writing. only because my brain moves faster than my fingers.
Yeah.
So my wife, well, she was my girlfriend at the time, but now my wife, she goes, well, why don't you just start like a podcast? Later, I found out after I'm like 100 episodes in, she wanted me to start this podcast because she was sick of hearing me talk to her.
Totally. She's like, can you get this out of your system with other people? Please?
Can you just interview people? Because, I'm sitting down with her like there's something going on in the world or there's a new piece of tech and she's not into pretty much any of that stuff. And I'm like, babe, did you see that new like iPod thing that came out? And let's talk. And she's like, can you just call one of your friends and FaceTime with them? Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do a pod. So anyway, that's how my podcast journey started. But then as I started doing more and more episodes and consuming more content, a lot of my time is working out and working. And when I work, I like to have podcasts in the background. But unfortunately, depending on the podcast you listen to, especially if it's educational, like I listen, it's kind of mundane. It's boring. Yep. So the cool thing with Podbeat that I like is no matter what beat you want to put in, funky, EDM, rock, it kind of like, it gets me working and especially working out for sure. But it gets you in that mode of doing what you kind of want to do, whether it's working out, running, walking, staying at your laptop or whatever. But it gets that heart rate up a little bit more, but you're also learning something at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of music, but at the end of the day, like music to me, if I'm consuming something, I'd rather be educating myself, especially if it's during work hours. So it's a really great idea, man. I really dig it.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, you make a great point about the content that podcasts provide. And that's why it was so important for us that we kind of don't think about what we're adding to it as music. It's a beat. So we really make sure that the beats that we add, and the listeners can choose any different beat style they want, but we keep them very minimal. We keep them so that they don't interfere with the content. That's why you're there, right? We want to support the voices. We want to like work with the voices. And that's why we give people control, right? They can speed it up, slow it down, control the volume so that it doesn't get in the way of the podcast. It's super important to them, Yeah,
no, that's huge.
Yeah. My background is some musicology too. So that helps me understand is just how much music actually does start to affect comprehension. There are certain notes and certain frequencies that actually affect what you're actually hearing and get in the way. So the way we test a lot of the beats is I'll go for like an hour run and listen to one beat before we put it live. And I'll listen to it and I'll make notes as I'm going. Is there any little moment in it that starts to affect? Because we design the beats to kind of grow and evolve, right? They start out kind of small, right? And we do them in 3-minute loops. So they evolve and build to kind of get you going, get you moving, take you up, and then they devolve a bit for the next loop. So it kind of keeps you engaged, even though it's so one type of beat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I didn't even notice it was a loop, actually, now that I think about it, because I think and a lot of people would know this if they actually start listening to it, is if you add any beat to, let's say, this particular podcast, and if you add a beat to this podcast, you'll notice like after 10 seconds, you don't even know it's there. It's just, you're listening. It almost seems like, and I don't know if this was your intention, but it almost seems like it matches the vocals of the podcast. I know it doesn't do that from a tech standpoint, but it's after you listen to it, it's almost like you kind of start like you're bopping a little bit to the podcasters talking. It's fascinating what your brain does when you hear a beat in a podcast together. Yeah.
When you think about it, we all do speak in certain rhythms, right? No one really kind of speaks really fast for a little bit and then starts to go like this, right? Right. Yeah. So you figure you could probably map out in 10 minutes of someone talking. There's a rhythm in there. Yeah. And when you put a consistent beat underneath it, that algorithm is going to line up and it's going to turn it into almost a spoken word thing, which is that's one of the comments we get from a lot of people. They're like, this feels like you made my podcast guy into a hip hop artist or a beat poet because he's not rhyming, but he's talking in rhythm. How did you do that? And like, we didn't do it. It just kind of happens.
Yeah. I wish we could take credit for it, but that's,
we would patent that shit so fast.
For real. Yeah. No, it's great, man, for sure. So kudos to you guys. And, I wish you all the best with that. It's a really cool app.
Thanks, man.
And then how did that happen from you? Because obviously, if you're working a full-time gig, right? I would imagine it's full-time.
Yeah.
So how are you juggling that? Because as a creative, I have issues with that as well, because I have my content business and then I have my podcast, but then I also own a company with my wife called Meet Cute Box, where we kind of like curate date night ideas for couples.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was just kind of like a side hustle we put together in the pandemic. Turns out it gained some traction, so it's exciting. But juggling all those, it's been a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you guys do it from like a creative standpoint? Because I'm sure it seems like, just the amount of times that I've talked, it seems like you kind of have this inner turmoil. If you have something that creatively you need to do, like, you're going to do it. There's no, am I right in that instance?
Yeah, you find time. It's funny
Yeah.
how many people talk about, well, I just, I get home from work and then, I watch some TV, I get a little tired and I don't feel like it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that makes sense. But if there's something you really want to do, you find time,
Yeah.
right? You just do. So this is something
Yeah.
that we care about and like enough that we find time. It helps that while I'm doing my job all day, my wife, Joy, co-founder, she runs it. She's full-time all the time. So it's like,
Nice.
if there's something I can't dip into during the day or get a hold of, she's got my back.
Shout out Joy.
Yeah. Shout out Joy.
Yeah, right on.
So, but yeah, the definitely the job that I'm working with Highdive and Jeep, like, it's not 9 to 5. It is. I mean, I think we've all seen over the last few years, very few jobs now are 9 to 5, right?
Mhm.
They're all the time, and I
Mhm.
think some people really struggle with that. I like it. There was never a time before where, like, you could go for a run in the middle of the afternoon at 2 p.m.
Sure.
But now you can book that time off, because, hey, the trade-off is I'm probably gonna have to do some emails tonight at 9:30.
That's right.
I'm gonna have a meeting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. because someone's in a different time zone. So
Mhm.
it's this balance, but I like to refer to it more like harmony, work-life harmony, man.
Yeah, for sure. And I forget who it was. Someone said something about we're always looking for work-life balance, but the word balance is kind of, I like how you said harmony. The word balance is kind of, it's a little misleading.
Yes.
Because as much as work is important, one thing I realize as a business owner and now a new father, and I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, since you got yours that are a little bit older now, so that you've broken away from that, and now you're kind of doing more. But one thing I realize is, I find let's put it this way, when I wasn't a father, I would find time to occupy my life with. It's almost like I was searching for things to do, versus now I'm, whether consciously or subconsciously, I'm only prioritizing things that are actually beneficial to our future.
Yep.
Versus, like, maybe I want to watch some YouTube videos and learn a little bit more on things. Sometimes I would go down rabbit holes for hours, consuming all this content, but there was no benefit to it. And now I kind of look at things different, especially now that I'm a girl dad. I'm like, how can I either make us more successful financially, or how can I learn more things? The amount of time that I do have, which is very, very small now, how can I spend that time doing things that are going to be beneficial to my career or our family? And one thing I struggled when I was working 9 to 5 was I would only go hard 9 to 5 at my current, or my corporate job. And then after that, I would still do my corporate job, but I'm not getting the recognition from corporate. I'm not getting paid extra for that. And while that sounds kind of selfish, we talk about work-life balance, I think I got to a point to where I'm like, the only people that are going to know that you work longer hours are your kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you're a new father like I am, like, after 5 p.m., whether I'm on salary or not, if I'm not getting the recognition, and I don't need a pat on the ass and say, hey, Tony, great job till working at 9 p.m. But at the same time, if I'm doing what I got to do, especially because I got laid off 2 jobs back to back from stuff that was out of my control, you spend all this time working at these corporate jobs, and you're a number to some of these folks, right? And if you're sacrificing time away from family or your spouse, and you're investing all that time, what's the long-term game? Like, what are you really thinking about down the road? And that's when my perception kind of changed a little bit, to where I don't necessarily think so far in advance anymore. My time is so valuable that I want to do what I can to spend time with the family. But also, if I am going to spend a little bit of time, I don't want to stress myself out. That whole work-life balance thing has just been, it's been hard for me to figure out, but I think I might have
Yeah.
figured it out. What's your thought process around that, especially now that you have a kid that's grown up and out of the house?
Well, the other thing about, just to add on that work-life balance thing,
Mhm.
was the reason it actually is flawed is that balance kind of implies opposing forces,
Mm,
right? And it shouldn't be that way. Like we are now
yeah.
at this point where, no, I want to figure out a way that my work can accentuate my life and my life can make my work better. And that's where
Mhm.
again, I go to the work-life harmony. How
Yeah.
can they work together, play off of each other? And I think this sort of more virtual world we live in kind of now is helping us with that. It's
Yeah.
helping us find ways that your day job can help you with your other stuff that you do, because it's all super fluid.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
but it's hard to organize, right? Like
Yeah.
it's hard to find a rhythm of no rhythm,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
For
Like
sure. Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible, right? Like to get to this point where like, yeah, no, I have no routine and that's my routine. It's like,
Mm.
all right. I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with, right? Is how do you make a routine, find routine that has no routine?
Yeah, that's right. Well, and also the social media isn't helping because every time we do pick up our phone, and we're
Yeah,
on our phones now and our laptops more than ever, especially if you're working from home, um, and you're the type of person that needs to be micromanaged. If you're on your phone all the time, you're always constantly comparing yourself to other
yeah,
people. You're
yeah,
comparing yourself to other jobs, and that person works 12 hours a week and they make 10 times as much as me. How come I can't be an influencer? How come I can't, start my own e-commerce product? How are these guys making millions of dollars, buying t-shirts and selling t-shirts? And we always like think the grass is greener on the other side. So we're not living in that specific moment
yeah,
where we're actually doing what we need to do because we're always, off in dreamland. And I think a lot of that has to do is you don't have that harmony at home because you're right. The word balance is kind of, it's a little misleading because it is almost 50-50. That's how we think of it, right? Like 50% of your time is work, 50% of your time is at home, and you need to figure out how to balance it. And I
yeah,
think if you can get your house in order and put your shit together at home, everything else kind of happens. Work, you become
yeah,
more productive, and your relationships become longer lasting and more important to you. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a hard thing to figure out. And I think as I get older, you know, you obviously start learning more things and seeing other people. But I find myself talking to my friends that are younger, like in their 20s, like 25, 26, and I'm almost 40. So, but I've always had typically younger friends. And a lot of them
yeah,
now are starting to settle down, get married, and, but they've been with these jobs that they're just working their ass off constantly.
yeah,
And, their spouse is just not happy with it. And they're spending so much time uh, worrying about something that really is out of their control. And
yeah,
not saying everyone should work for themselves because I don't think that's the case at all. But I think you have to figure out if you are working for a job and you are spending that time, if you don't have that harmony at home, it's going to create a lot of problems and a
yeah,
lot of stress. And I'm always like a crazy, especially I'm on the treadmill or something. And I always think like on a macro standpoint, some of this stuff where it's like, okay, I'm using my friend as an example. He's got a horrible day job, let's say. He wakes up, he's miserable. He gets his coffee, right? He's on the way to work. A guy cuts him off. Coffee spills on his shirt. He goes to work all pissed off. He doesn't hit his numbers, his quota. His boss is upset with him. He gets a sit down from his boss. Now he's upset. Now he ends up going home, ignoring his kids, ignoring his wife because he wants to do a good job. And the
yeah,
next thing you know, 5 years later, he gets laid off from that company. It's like,
yeah,
okay, so 5 years you spent getting upset about the coffee spilling on you, the guy cutting you off, which really all you had to do was just figure out that one thing you really like to do, go all in on that.
yeah. Like a good cup holder. Get a good coffee cup holder. Like just go all in on an amazing cup holder.
And that's all you have to do. Everything else
Yeah.
will happen.
It's a domino effect once you have a really good cup holder.
Yeah, dude. Like get yourself a nice car with a nice cup holder. Yeah.
Yeah. You made a great point about your wife though. It's like working with your spouse, not even work with your spouse. I mean, we everyone is working with their spouse, right? In a
Sure.
way. It's the honesty, right?
Mm.
They need you. It's so important that you guys communicate with each other about what is not working, what is working, what you're doing too little of, what you're doing too much of. I think too many relationships they get caught up in like, no, I'm good with it. Where they're so focused on being supportive that they
Mm.
forget that they're not being honest. And there's all these things that are kind of growing up inside them that they're angry about that you're doing that they didn't say to you because they are so caught up in being supportive. And that can lead to resentment, man. Like
Yeah.
I'm on my second marriage, and I see that from my first one.
Mm.
Someone who was being supportive but not being honest about that, and that will bite you in the ass.
Yeah, there is a difference
Yes.
for sure. Yeah. And, also too, like holding that resentment from past relationships.
Oh yeah.
I've realized too, like, it took me, I don't even know how many, hopefully my wife doesn't listen to this, but I don't know how many, how many
Based on what you
times.
said, it sounds like she's not going to listen to this at all.
Yeah, I will make sure she doesn't. But I don't remember how many, women I had to figure out of what not to do. There's like these little steps that we take and these little mistakes you make. And, some people don't apply that knowledge to future relationships and you end up
Yes.
making the same mistakes over and over. But it's interesting when you don't communicate and you're not honest with each other. That's one thing that we try to do, especially now that we're both working from home. And we've worked from home, both of us, since 2020, since the pandemic. So, knock on wood, 4 years, and we haven't killed each other. It's a huge win, I think, huge positive. But that is a hard thing because sometimes, especially now that we have a newborn, whether we're putting her down for a nap or we got to feed her or whatever, we found out really early, like month 3, that we weren't communicating. We were trying to be the tough guy. Like, I don't know if you could relate. I think your kid, was what, 24 years old. So it's,
She's 23 right now. Yeah.
yeah. So this, I don't know if you remember 23 years ago, but if a lot of my friends can relate to this too, where in that early stage, when you put the kid down for a nap or you have to feed them the bottle and they do that little freak out that they do that's uncontrollable, you change them, you try to rock them, that doesn't work. And it seems like nothing works. And we found out really early that we're trying to do it all ourselves, like each of us. So when I have our baby, I'm like, I can change her. And she's like, can I help? And I'm like, no, I got it. I'll rock her. It's fine. But you don't know that there is a little ninja that goes in the back of that brain. And after a few, 30 minutes of that baby crying, there's something that happens to you inside. I don't know what it is, but there is an anger that releases you, not obviously physically, but it's your blood is rushing, it's pumping. And then my wife says, can I help? And I go, no, dude, I'm fine. Like what? And then I caught myself. I'm like, hold on, why am I so angry? Oh, it's because I have the baby yelling in my ear for 20 minutes straight.
Yeah.
So we realized, we're like, all right, dude, if something goes down, we just need to go up to the person, hand them the baby and walk away. We've decided no words. That's just the sign because we were trying to like tell each other, I got her. Let's do this. Let's do that. We did that for like 3 months and it was not going very well.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to use that. That sounds like a good euphemism. You know what? You just got to hand them the baby and walk away.
Dude, that's it.
I'm going to use that for a lot of stuff. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm just going to hand you this baby and walk away.
Yeah. Just don't ever put the baby in the corner. That's the one thing you don't do. But yeah, man, we had to, but we figured that out, and that was that communication that, we were tested right after being married almost 8 years. Or being together rather 8 years, we never were tested like that. But you get tested, and we had to check ourselves and be honest with each other and say, this is what pissed us off. This is what really ticked us off, and we need to learn how to pivot, because it's also not.
You're running a company. You guys are running a company, and you're raising a product. Yeah, and you guys got to delegate and work together on making this a great product.
Yeah, that's right.
That actually works as an analogy.
That's a really great analogy, and I'm going to use that one from you. I'm going to steal that one. Yeah, especially because this product is going to be, the second she could stand up, she didn't even talk, but the second she's going to have a lemonade stand on the driveway. Like, she's going to be my co-host on my podcast. Like, we're going to do some big things. So this girl needs to hurry up and learn how to do some things. She's going to get to work real quick.
Get her there, man. Get her on.
Yeah, dude. That's the goal. And then from a creative standpoint, because you guys are not only doing this business, but how do you feel like creativity, because we talked about this when we were before we started recording, but from a creative standpoint, how do you feel like when you do come up with these ideas or when you do have something that comes to you? Are you the type of person that needs to react? Are you the one that do you seek the creativity on social media? Like, how do you kind of go through your creative process when it comes to work or even Podbeat?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am a reactor for creativity. I rarely sit down and go, "Hey, I'm going to come up with something." I
Mm,
let things occur to me, and then I live with them for a bit. Then I'll start to write them down and kind of revisit them and think about them, and then just it's the thing. Like one day it it's you put it in the back of your head, and then one day you've solved it by not thinking about it.
that's right.
So
Yeah.
the creative process, it's so difficult. And I think what makes it so difficult though is we all know so many creative people, and they're never just creative in one thing, right? It's
Mhm.
always spread out to like three or four things that they are
Yeah.
creative in. And I have a lot of discussion with my other creative friends about this. It's like, how do you decide which is the one that you're going to get the most value out of? What
Mhm.
is the one creative outlet that you have that you're going to get the most value out of? And we joke about this analogy. It's like Superman. All right, Superman. He can fly. He can run super fast. He has super strength.
Mhm.
He's invulnerable, and he has laser beams that shoot out of his eyes. Like, as a creative person, he's got 5 creative powers.
Yeah.
Which one does he like the most? Like, which I'd be surprised if he's like, I love the laser beams, man. The laser beams are just cool. I can lay back and just shoot them and I get a tingle. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or does he get the most out of flying, And, to jump off in that analogy, like as a creative person, what excites you about all the little creative things you can do? Can you pick one
Mm.
that is sort of like the lead dog, but then like has other elements around it that still kind of you get to do? And I think that that's why I went to advertising. I decided, this is what I want to do. I'm an art director, a designer, and a writer. But in advertising, you're telling a story, right? Like I do a lot of film. So you're doing a 30-second commercial. You're telling a story, you're showing a product, you're involved in how it's shot, the photography, the art direction, you're involved in what's being said. Then you're involved in the music and how that all comes together. It's like 9 things
Yeah.
creatively. And if you love all those things, it is a perfect thing for you to do.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially because my passion from my background, I don't think we've talked about this, but it was marketing and advertising prior to this as
Oh,
well.
nice.
And I worked at Monster Energy for almost a decade. And I realized that I had my own marketing firm way back in the day. I partnered up with a buddy down in South Florida, and we essentially kind of put together like Groupon before it was Groupon, but it was more like
Yeah.
D2C type stuff.
Yeah.
And we had a cool business. It was a lot of fun, but I was a kid, man. I spent all my money, and I ended up selling it to him, and he ran into the ground. But it was just overall, it was just a fun learning experience.
Yes.
And then when I worked at Monster Energy, I was in the sales department and I was a manager, got promoted. But as a side hustle, I would create advertising campaigns and marketing campaigns for my counterpart that was in the marketing department at Monster. And then after a couple of years of doing that, he's like, bro, this shit's like doing really good. Why don't you apply for this gig we got coming up? It's a marketing manager for the Southeast. And I was like, oh, right on. So I applied and I ended up getting it. I got it, and then I got promoted and moved up from there. And that was like my passion. So to kind of go back to your analogy of Superman, it's like I was doing a lot of things. I was doing the sales, the management, but then like as a side hustle, I was doing the marketing and advertising. And I was like, I really dig it. And that's actually another reason why I started my podcast, was because I had all this like goo of experience that I needed to, release. And that's another reason why, I started it. And that now I'm all in on that. Now I'm all in because with my content business, that's essentially what I do. I'm marketing myself. I'm marketing a product. I advertise. I'm involved with all the creative stuff as well. So eventually I want to get to a point where I'm a little bit more like hands off and I'm more behind the scenes doing the actual ideation and script writing and editing, all that stuff. But that is
less goo and less release.
Yes,
Okay,
that's the goal.
because this took a weird turn when you you got into the goo and the release.
Yes. Well, we could all relate. Uh, especially if you have a newborn, you don't have any time for that release.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It was the goo and the release that led to the newborn.
That's right.
So, so it all full circle.
It's full circle. It's the circle of life.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, that's the one thing I think being a creative is you find those different avenues. And if you could, thankfully we're in kind of a cool situation, right? Because with the internet, social media, I mean, you can, if you're a creative, dude, you can dip your hands on a lot of different stuff, right? I mean, and just to kind of throw things up against the wall and see what sticks.
You really can. You know what?
Yeah.
The way you're saying creative, it reminds me, we're a little snobby with how we use the word creative, aren't we?
That's true. Yeah, at least I am, I think. Yeah.
I think every creative person kind of is. But, I work with a lot of people that are considered not creative, and you're in meetings with them, and they say some of the most creative shit ever. And you're kind of like, I think we're a little snobby with this. It's like, no, let the creatives or the artists kind of think about that. Whereas you can be extremely creative in your marketing and sales plan. That is in a way, just the same thing to you that it is to a artist, if you will.
That's right. And I think being a creative, you got to be an innovator too. And that's one thing where I think companies aren't necessarily trying to go down that path of like outsourcing different creatives. They're just trying to sit in their, ivory towers wearing their white wigs at 60 years old, thinking that they know what's best for the market. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is these 20, 30, 40-year-old creatives that not only have the experience, but have kind of the gusto to actually go after some dangerous, interesting, creative avenues that might be a little bit outside the box.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's driving innovation as a whole forward. Because you look at like Apple Vision Pro is a good example, just because I was consuming so much content on that. But
Have you tried it yet?
No, but I have tons of buddies that have told me, yo, bro, come and try mine. So it's definitely a plan of mine for sure. Because they swear by it. Have you? Fun?
I haven't. I've got my Oculus Pro that I've had for a while. I love it. So I am looking forward to it. Yeah. I do want to wait for the next version.
The next version, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what's interesting about the Vision Pro is it wouldn't be what it is without creative. Because I don't know if you're familiar with that backstory, but they've sent out a bunch of models to YouTubers and creatives and influencers to test this thing out prior to it being sold. And figuring out the pinpoints and what works, what makes sense, what would it be used for. More often than not, the person that's going to buy that is not the person that just wants to watch Pornhub on the Vision Pro. It's most likely going to be the creative, right? It's going to be the person that wants to have a lot of tabs open at once. The person that maybe
bring that up.
It's
funny you bring that up because it actually it won't allow you to watch porn of any kind.
Then why even buy it then? That's ridiculous.
There's actually I was reading it. They think it's going to be a very interesting test case because so far, so often anyway, porn does kind of weirdly like lead the charge on some of this stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah,
which is horrible. Mm-hmm. But they've blocked it in a way that it's not possible. And I don't know how they did it, but it will be interesting to see if that somehow holds it back, which will be sad. That would be a very sad statement.
Yeah.
Us as people.
Yeah. That's more. Well, what about the Oculus? Are you allowed to? Can you Google search?
I've never even looked into it. You know why?
Okay, Nathan. Sure, you haven't. All right. So
no. Here's why. Actually, it's funny you say that.
Yeah.
Because my account is actually connected to my daughter's as well. So it's just the idea of any level of anything.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wouldn't touch it.
Terrifying.
Man.
Yeah, terrifying. That's smart. Yeah. And it's a good move. I mean, porn is horrible for you anyway. So but it's funny how these creatives that are leading this charge kind of put us on this path of like they're the ones that are testing things out. We don't necessarily know it unless you're involved in that world, but I do look at like creative as they're a little snobby. They're a little bit. They are the artists. They're the Michelangelos that are like being kind of cocky. Hanging up saying, I need this, I need that, because this is going to be the future of painting. So I think we need that a little bit. But then also, contrast to that, leads you to being just an outsider watching all this stuff go down. That's where it gets kind of squirrely, where everyone thinks that they can do it because there is so many people doing it. and
Yeah.
there's so much bullshit on the internet, and it's hard to kind of sift through all the bullshit. So, like for me, it is hard to be a creative, especially because we've worked together. So having competitors, having people that kind of do what I do, that water down that industry,
Yeah.
it is a bit of a challenge to kind of rise above everything, because you don't want to level the playing field, because I personally think, which is a big reason why I have a bunch of creatives on my podcast, is because I don't necessarily believe in competing with creatives. I think every single person's different. Every single person could, bring something to the table that I can't, and vice versa. So I think if we just lift everyone up, we're just creating better humans and better creative people, and that just leads to more cool shit like the Vision Pro. Like if we can just lift each other and help each other all out, I think that's the key to it. And that's how I kind of encompass the word creative, is like you're always looking to learn more and collaborate and connect and innovate and just create cool shit that's going to lead the market forward. I think that's how, if I had to elevate or pitch a creative, that's what it would be.
Yeah, man. I think there's so many great examples. Hater creators, they don't get very far. They don't rise up too far, man. They get their due. So I agree totally. It's hard to be positive. It's hard to be supportive. But when you are, it pays out, man. Like it just does.
Yeah, no doubt. And the last thing, I didn't even realize, bro, but we're like almost at 45 minutes. You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I got a meeting in about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. I just want to ask you one more thing, because I noticed on your app you're kind of playing around with this on social media. But what do you think about AI? Because I use it all the time. Yeah. I know you're dipping into it as well. But like, what's your thought process on everything? How to use it creatively? Where do you see it going?
I went through a full arc of like not liking it at all. Going, what are you doing? Why are you taking away from people's art online? You're taking all their stuff for free and you're stealing it. But you know what? I think what's super important about AI is the level of education people have about it. If you really look into it, something like image generation, it is art that is influenced from all the art that's ever been made. Yeah. So, it's not like if you're creating an image and there's a person's face and there's an eyeball, that eyeball is made up of hundreds of thousands of eyeballs that have been out there for the last 50 years since photography started. And that makes me think, you know what? You can't copyright something that becomes original from influence. There's a way to think about image generation as this is just influence from everything it's ever seen, and it's putting together something that is completely new. Yeah. And people are like, well, yeah, but how do you monetize it and make sure people get paid? It's like, well, you can't, because even if you were to dig into the metadata of every image that's ever come together and is created into something like some of the images that I make for Podbeat, if you could pay that with the artists, first of all, half of them would be dead. So there's that. That's a lot of paperwork. But also you'd be writing checks for like 0.00001 cent to people.
That's right.
So there's not even a world where it's really taking. I think people have to look at AI and say, this is a tool that I'm going to learn how to use. I'm going to learn how to use it and decide if it's right for me, decide if it makes what I do better. And that's what I've found. It helps us communicate what Podbeat does. So we use it. We're a small business. We're a bootstrapped startup business, and we create these images on our own. We iterate them to death, and we spend a lot of time on them. And so I feel okay with it. I've made my peace with it. The one that I love right now is we're using it to translate my voice. So Podbeat right now is in about 8 different countries. So we can actually take some of my social videos and I translate my voice into Spanish. Now I'm very transparent about this. When I translate it, I actually say in Spanish, hey, I don't speak Spanish, but I want to use artificial intelligence to be able to communicate to you about this thing called Podbeat. It's something my wife and I made. It lets you add a beat to any podcast. So we translate that into Spanish and into any other language so that we're just being authentic right out of the gate with people about what we're doing. We don't want to, you don't want to trick people. So
no, of course. And that's so cool. You sent me that one clip. I was like, yo, bro, that is dope. That's really cool. And, I love what you said about AI, to where it's like, there's really, at the end of the day, there's nothing we could do about it. There's no laws that are going to be passed. I mean, you look at like where social media is as a whole. Congress can't even get a hold of Zuckerberg and all these social media guys. They're not going to do shit for AI. So, everyone should probably put that out of their brain. But I also kind of like, I was having this debate with my buddy the other day because he's terrified of AI. And I go, well, first of all, let's not get crazy unless James Cameron makes a movie on this. Okay. Like we got plenty of time to freak out. Now we're in such early stages. It's crazy. But you got to look at AI as if it's like on Microsoft Word, if you're making, whatever, you're writing a novel on Microsoft Word and you're just writing a novel, you're doing your thing, you're dumping your brain. You need to spell check and grammar check that. You go up top, you hit edit, select all, spelling and grammar check. That's AI, man. It's using a tool and it's making what you did better. And that's kind of what image generation is it's a tool that's searching the globe, the internet, because no one person can do that anyway. And it's kind of creating this unique image for what exactly you asked. And what I love most about it is you can ask it the exact same prompt afterwards, like Midjourney in particular. One prompt, it gives you an image. The exact same prompt, it's a totally different image.
Yes, totally.
Which to me is fascinating because I look at that like not only am I, getting a bunch of images, but not one image is the same. So as a creative, as someone that's going to utilize this tool, every single piece of content, I'm starting to use it in like my podcast clips now, like my vertical clips. I used to use like B-roll that I would have to, pay a service to. And I get B-roll from other people that it's kind of like bland and boring B-roll. But this now I'm creating artificial intelligence, or I'm having artificial intelligence create unique B-roll that you've never seen as the viewer. And that to me is like, that's going to make everything more exciting and more cool. So, and that's what this is about, man. We're trying to live in a place where we can just enjoy cool shit. You know, that's like saying, I don't want Netflix to have the highest camera. I don't want them to use red cameras or the high tech. Like what? No, I want them to use the most pristine stuff because me as the viewer, I want to enjoy this. And that's how we got to think of AI. It's like, it's going to be cool, man.
It all goes back to the camera, actually, when you think about it. So when the camera first came out, photography first came out, every artist that was painting landscapes, every artist who was doing portraits looked at each other and said, we're fucked. And you know what? The good ones said, no, we're not.
Yeah.
Picasso, abstract art, all of that new type of art, like pop art, all of it, Warhol, all of it only happened because of the camera. Because they saw the camera and said,
they had to pivot.
You took a photo? Cool. Check out this. Try to take a photo of this.
Yeah.
And that's not possible, what the great artist did. So
And that's what we talked about, right? Creative is all about innovating and figuring out ways to pivot and to make things better. I even think it's going to get to the point, and I'll leave it at this, is I find AI more fascinating because we're going to appreciate the human work so much that I think eventually AI stuff will be free.
Yes.
And the human stuff is going to be that premium stuff that we pay for. And I think there's going to be eventually be a way to where you'll have to go to like, chat human and you'll have to type in, give me a real podcast between Tony and Nathan from 2024 and it will spit out human stuff. I think that's what it's going to eventually be, and we'll appreciate it more. So I think we need to just start appreciating the human element as it is and utilize these tools to make the human stuff better. That's how
that's great, man. Love it.
But listen, Nathan, thanks for the time, man. Almost an hour. I appreciate you. One more time for everyone listening and watching. I'm going to leave everything in the description below, but give us a shout out where they can find on social media and all that jazz.
Yeah, guys, check out Podbeat. It's we're on Instagram, we're on Threads, we're on YouTube, we're on TikTok. If you love podcasts like this one and you want to hear this lovely man's voice to like a killer trap beat, download Podbeat. It's free in the App Store.
Nice. All right. And by the way, this is not a beat from Podbeat, but this is just my beat. So, ladies and gentlemen, Nathan, thanks for coming on, man. This was fun.
Thank you.
Keep doing what you do, man, and enjoy your weekend, brother. We appreciate you.
You too.